Hello everyone, my name is Ben, hitting you with another different kind of video today. So if you're watching this one, you probably would have seen the video that Team APS made, which they went over the good, the bad, and the ugly for the Digimon TCG. Now, Alec actually had a lot of opinions for the Digimon TCG, and some of them I agree with, and some of them I don't. So this is going to be kind of like a reaction video, or more so just my thoughts on those opinions. If I don't say anything that was mentioned in Alec's video, that probably just means I didn't have an opinion about it, or I forgot. Anyways, let's get into it.
Many people just want to buy and hold the boxes, so it would just made a nightmare to get your hands on product when it all first dropped. But really, ever since then, Bandai has done a great job of getting these products out on time and having enough supply to satisfy everyone.
Now, this is one of the many opinions that I actually agree with. For those who played the Digimon TCG since its release, you would know that from set 1.0 to 1.5, it was almost impossible to get product. Even I myself only managed to get lucky because I managed to convince a local card shop to buy a case when it wasn't planning to support Digimon originally. Basically, I kind of had to kickstart a community over in that local card shop in order to have Digimon product to begin with. And I also hear plenty of stories that for Europe distributions, you guys have it a lot worse than over here in the West. I'm not sure if it's a lot better now, I can only speak from the West, but at least over here in Canada, it is much better than it was before. Nowadays, it's actually easy to buy singles, I'm not forced to buy at least half a case every set, and the community has been growing bigger and bigger. Honestly, at least in Canada, it's been a great time to be a Digimon player.
They regularly add new mechanics to the game, and it just feels like fairly regularly we just add something new, some kind of just new mechanic that keeps things kind of fresh, and that always helps to make new sets more interesting.
Now, this point I also agree with. The Digimon TCG does a great job of keeping things fresh with the new mechanics, and I think their new mechanics are really fleshed out, and especially the part that I love about it that Alec didn't mention is that they are really good at keeping lore-accurate effects. I mean, the very obvious one is with the Jesmon being supported by his sistermons, but even something recent, let's take from BT13, there is the BT13 Alphamon, which has the effect where all turns when this Digimon would leave the battle area, by removing an X antibody or a Royal Knights from its sources, it gets to stay in the battle area. Not only is this a decent protection effect, it's also lore accurate because it's able to prevent itself from leaving the battle area due to Yggdrasil's effect in the Royal Knights deck. Just like how in lore that Alphamon is able to reject Yggdrasil's will whenever it desires. There's even legacy support in BT15, for example, the Bird Vaccine deck. The new Sora, Biomon, and even the Garudamon Ace is a great addition for the deck. And even the new Twins of Love option card is phenomenal for what it wants to do. Or even in BT14 with the Yellow Core, being able to support all these old yellow strategies all in one go, just from 3 cards.
In the last couple years, we've had many new TCGs enter the space, a few of them by Bandai themselves. And so as someone who really enjoys Digimon, who really loves Digimon, I don't care to see the parent company of this game introducing more competition for it. At different locals, you'll either have a One Piece community or you'll have a Digimon community. I've seen very few that have both, unless they kind of share players. But a lot of times I'm seeing either or.
Now, you see, this I actually do agree. There has definitely been in some case of self-cannibalization over in my card shop. Ever since the release of the One Piece TCG, I personally have witnessed a lot of Digimon players move over to that game, mainly because it's a bigger IP and with better pricing. They still love playing the Digimon TCG from time to time, but the One Piece TCG just offers a lot more competitively, and plus it's their favorite IP, so it only makes sense. But of course, there's also the release of Battle Spirit Saga, which I could probably mention it in a separate video, but long story short, I think that a lot of the decisions that Bandai has made left a lot to be desired in my opinion. And with them trying so hard to stir up hype by having cash pricing, it really makes you wondering why don't they ever do something like that for Digimon if it's capable for them there. Now, of course, I'm not very knowledgeable about the situation either. It's very possible that they have different development teams and or PR teams for the different card games respectively, but I also would like something like that for the Digimon TCG. Rambles aside, I agree. With the rapid increase of new TCGs coming out on the market, I don't really want to see Bandai have a divided attention on all the card games they release.
So coming from a Yu-Gi-Oh background, I'm used to seeing that there's a regional in just any one place or any area and just showing up to play. And you didn't have to sign up ahead of time to actually go. You could just drop by. And signing up ahead of time wouldn't be so bad, but when it comes to Digimon tournaments, you typically have to sign up at least 2 months ahead of time to be able to guarantee your spot in a tournament. Now for hardcore Digimon tournament purists, this won't be a problem. They'll adjust for it. They know they'll make time. But for other people, they don't know if they'll make time. And so I kind of miss the very casual nature in which I was able to compete in in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's so much harder in Digimon.
Yes, this point right here, I has a hard agree. Now, I'm not sure if you guys know this, I kind of made multiple videos about my opinions of online tournaments, but I guess this is my opportunity to finally admit it. I hate online tournaments with a passion. So much so that I didn't even think I would even participate in Nats, because the only way to get an invite now, if I were to play in Canada, is to participate in the regionals, which unfortunately is only available online. And if you want me to get into the details of why I don't like online tournaments, is the following. 1. As Alec mentioned, it is a pain in the ass to sign up for these online tournaments. You have to sign up so far in advance where you don't even know if you'll be available during that time, and because they sell out so quickly, you basically have to know life that day in order to get yourself a spot. 2. Rampant cheating. Now, I know the One Piece TCG has a more higher record for this, but that's mainly because they have higher pricing, but the risk is still there. I mainly play card games for the social aspect. I like to converse with my opponent and just chat up while we play, but I unfortunately can't really do that when I'm trying way too hard to make sure that nothing fishy goes on while we play our game. And that doesn't even bring up the fact that if for whatever reason I get a shitty connection while we're on call, if my camera goes out, that could just lead to a game loss. And number 3, unfortunately, at least in the small experience that I've had in playing in a few online tournaments, a lot of these online tournaments take way too long. And I don't really want to be sitting at my desk for long periods of time. So unfortunately, online tournaments just aren't it for me. I'd much rather be playing in in-person events rather than an online tournament.
Something I didn't care for in the last couple years, the security promo Digimon. I believe they were like tournament prizes they got released. I really don't care for a specific promo. You know, it does a very specific thing, and it's unique, but you can only get them in extremely limited quantities in like one way. And what that often leads to is cards that were relevant in like the Japanese format during a time, but they may not be relevant for our format because we just haven't released them yet.
Ooh, now this is a weird one. When it comes to promos, I would say I would half agree with Alec's point here. When it comes to the tournament promos, I kinda don't really care about them too much, so I actually don't mind that we get some unique promos for these tournaments. And the reason why I think that is because a lot of the time, these promos are not really game defining. The only arguable one is maybe the security rookies, but all it does is add a little style of play. The only one that I could think of that definitely changes the deck a lot would probably be the Dark Knightmon, but that actually more leans into the half of where I agree with Alec's point, and that being the promos take way too long for us to get here. So in terms of promos that are only available in tournaments, I think they're actually a good thing because that actually enforces more players to come play in their local card shop. But the actual problem is it takes way too long for these promos to get here. A promo that he didn't even mention is, for example, the Siegemon or even the Zubamon. Decks like, for example, Aegisdramon has been waiting for that support card forever, but we have zero idea on when we're getting it. I think the latest news I heard is that we're maybe gonna get that Siegemon in EX5, but I'm not so certain. He does make a point about the training cards being released a little late, but that's where I kind of disagree, and that's mainly because we're getting them roughly around the same time that Japan has got them as well. And to be honest, it's probably the earliest we possibly could have gotten these promos. So I don't really think that's much of a valid complaint there, but I do agree that some of these promos, specifically the ones that are really important for supporting the respective decks, are taking way too long to come over here to the West.
You know, coming from Yu-Gi-Oh!, there's always been this outcry for lining up the OCG and the TCG's ban lists, but Digimon has definitely swayed me against that as hard as humanly possible. You know, now it's been announced that they're gonna hit the level 5 Galgamon in that deck down to 1, and that kind of takes the wind out my sails a bit. Cause I'm like, well, shoot, because I kept telling myself that, wow, this deck's going to be at full power when I finally get this option card. But by the time I get that option card, that Galgamon goes to 1, and so now the deck will just never truly be at full power, at least not the way I envisioned it, and I never get a chance to play it.
And now we get to the main negative point here, which is talking about the recent ban list for the Digimon TCG. Now, I think there's a lot to be said about the recent ban list, and I could probably make an entirely different video about it, because honestly this would be a little too long. But consider this like a brief synopsis in my opinion. Point number 1, now, trigger warning, I think this is probably an opinion that it's not going to be very popular. And that opinion is going to be, I will never understand the desire of wanting to play a deck at full power. Specifically, degenerate strategies that cause a specific card to be hit to 1. For example, he brings up the Mirage Galgamon, which he does make a valid point that Mirage Galgamon is pretty inconsistent and not performing really well with only the release of BT13. However, he doesn't really take into account how much power the training cards give Mirage Galgamon, and as to why that hit that EX4 Mount Galgamon. The reason why they hit the Mount Galgamon is quite simple, it being able to evolve into a level 5 for practically 1 memory by using the EX4 inheritables from the Galmon and the Galgamon respectively. Now, Bandai has already made it pretty clear that any opportunity that allows a very explosive deck to evolve into a level 6 too quickly is not good for the game. And with specifically the Mount Galgamon being able to bounce a level 4 to the opponent's hand mitigates the strategy of wanting to keep a small body on the board to mitigate BT11 Mirage Galgamon's bounce effect. Not only do you get the turbo out into a level 6 a lot more quickly, you are also more likely to bounce a security card into your opponent's hand with Mirage Galgamon's effect. Also doesn't take into account that that Mach Galgamon is the only Mach Galgamon with a non-mandatory inheritable to unsuspend itself. Majority of the time with the other Mach Galgamons, you will likely be missing the timing with their inheritable effects to unsuspend itself, unless you're going to be swinging with the Mach Galgamon first, and the majority of the time that is going to be suboptimal. This actually mitigates the capability of the deck to OTK, but if you're set up properly, the deck can still OTK just fine. And if I'm going to be real for a little bit, as someone who tests decks a lot, Mirage Galgamon is very powerful, and I mean scary powerful, due to the support of the training cards. Like, genuinely, Mirage becomes the next best deck if Shine gets hit in some way, shape, or form. But I digress. The main point that I want to bring in here is that if there is a degenerate deck, regardless of how long you get to play it for, within those moments and where that deck is legal, it is not fun for the other players on the other side of the playmat. Like, I understand you want to feel that rush and adrenaline from playing a really strong deck at full power, but at the same time, if you're playing a too powerful deck, in my opinion, it actually drives more people away from playing the game, rather than getting more people into the game from playing a really powerful deck. And then we can take a look at Crossheart. A lot of people still have complaints about Crossheart being hit 2 weeks after its release, but for those of you who've actually played against Crossheart within those 2 weeks, I think we all know how powerful and unfun of a card that Cross 4 really was. It's like you're playing a video game, right? I'd rather have the patched version of the game rather than the buggy version of the game on release. Which is why I personally don't mind at all if they decide to hit a card that is problematic before its release. Now, the argument of having separate balance for the West and Japanese formats is totally valid, because we actually see some full confirmation in this, in that Melga X, for example, wasn't even hit until the Promoware Gurumon got released and was legal for Japanese formats. Whereas we in the West have been complaining about that card practically forever. But I think this just comes down to a bit of a lack of communication from Bandai's side. I would appreciate it more if Bandai would be able to listen to our complaints in terms of the meta, if there were some cards that we have in our pool that is different from the Japanese pool. Now, moving on to the stuff that was actually hit in the recent ban list, that being the Eismon Scatter Mode and the new Gabumons, this is where I get to another unpopular opinion of mine, probably. I actually don't mind it. In fact, I actually believe that it's probably the best we're gonna get. And there are actually 2 reasons for this. Number 1, they will absolutely not hit any cards that have not been released yet in the West, because that is just poor marketing. Why would you hit a card before it actually gets released on shelves? That is not very smart. Otherwise, I would have said, please hit the Garurumon X. That card is not healthy for the game. That is essentially Greymon X2 from BT11. And for those of you who played during that format at the time, know exactly what I'm talking about. That said, for those of you who don't understand the Japanese format and wondering why they hit those cards in the first place, allow me to explain a little bit. Now, in terms of color of what is the most topping decks right now in Japan are actually purple decks. More specifically, Apocalypse. And Apocalypse really abuses the Eismon engine and Gabumons. And if I'm being completely honest, those cards were always just ripe for the breaking. Being able to cycle through 8 cards from your deck on turn 2 pretty much almost guarantees that you are not going to brick in most situations. Meaning a deck like Apocalypse that really benefits from having selective trashing is very much going to abuse it. And that also means, as much as purple players may not want to hear it, it is not really good future-proof design. Having looked at the purple card pool a lot myself, I've actually found plenty of alternatives for those respective cards. So if you guys are actually interested in what kind of alternatives you can put for those cards, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. But I think this all boils into the actual problem with the recent ban list. The actual problem, in my opinion, is Bandai's banning system. Being limited to only limiting and or banning rare cards and below really do end up leading to only hitting consistency cards rather than the actual problem cards. Now, of course, there are prime examples where they actually do hit the problem cards, that being Mega Digimon Fusion, Hidden Potential Discovered, and also Ice Wall respectively. But in this case, I would say we've reached a point where it's now time to start hitting SRs or above. Take, for example, one of the most recent topping lists of Anubismon. Anubismon is a deck that focuses on swarming the board by abusing the card Mervamon. Mervamon being able to Digicross and come out at a play cost of 8 rather than a play cost of 11, which then gets to spawn out 2 more purple bodies on the field that potentially also have blocker and rush. A huge tempo swing. Now, normally you would only be able to bring out for 8, so it's actually not too bad, but with Anubismon's extra reduction, as well as the inheritables that gain memory whenever you play a Digimon by an effect, it's really easy to cheat out this card, which I think was probably a design oversight. As a matter of fact, the recent ban list doesn't even hit this deck at all. A lot of people suggest hitting the Ignitemon, but this comes down to the actual point of the ban list. If there is a degenerate combo that is not healthy for the game, there are 2 ways you can go about it. You can either go about it by hitting how consistently you can reach that combo, or you can restrict how often you're allowed to do it. I think hitting Mervamon is a lot better of a choice, because by hitting the Mervamon, you're only allowed to bring it out once. If you're able to bring out 2 Anubismons on the field, you cannot bring out 2 Mervamons on the field, because that is a sudden 8 bodies on the field that could all have rush, which only a very select few amount of decks can even deal with, if at all. And same thing with the big elephant in the room, Apocalypse. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Apocalypse deck, it is a very powerful strategy which focuses entirely on milling the opponent out. Now, the strategy itself is not necessarily annoying to deal with, it's the fact of how quickly you're able to bring it out. And originally their plan was to hit the Aizmon scatter mode and the Gabumons to be able to slow down its selective milling. But unfortunately, with purple as a strategy, it's actually quite easy to find replacements for those cards, as I mentioned. Which is why I think the actual solution to this problem is to be hitting the Apocalypse to 1. That way, we actually limit the amount of times you're allowed to bring him out onto the field. Because the majority of the time of how the Apocalypse matchup goes, when they bring out the first Apocalypse, they'll be able to mill at least 18 cards, practically guaranteed. And by the time you finally caught up and be able to out the Apocalypse, they just bring out 2 more and then they call game. Limiting it to 1 would then actually limit the amount of times you can mill, and then you're forced to run other cards that mill the opponent's deck out, so that way you not only slow down the selective milling the deck has, you're only now using Apocalypse as a dedicated mill out strategy as an endgame boss, rather than bringing it out as soon as turn 2. And another thing that I think Bandai should try to incorporate into their ban list system, if they don't want to hit any SRs or secret rares, I think the best choice of action would actually be choice restrictions. If you actually looked into the BT15 set, it is very clear the deck they were trying to create when designing Apocalypse. Unfortunately, if you look at the recent topping list, they actually forego those support cards entirely and focus on a selective mill strategy to turbo out the Apocalypse onto the board. If they decide to go with choice restriction, like say Apocalypse cannot be used with any purple cards unless they specifically mention Dark Masters, that would actually be a lot better, because then Apocalypse players would then be forced to adopt those Dark Masters cards into the deck in order to try to get some form of strategy. And for those of you who have actually tried the Dark Masters cards in an Apocalypse strategy, you would know that the Apocalypse can only come out practically as soon as turn 4, which is a lot more manageable, because most decks start to get their gas going as soon as turn 4, on average. This could also be used for things such as like the Doru Greymon. As you know, Doru Greymon was hit because it gave really good protection effects for Alphamon, while also giving it incredible offensive capabilities. However, due to hitting it, its sister deck, Doru Goramon, was unfortunately no longer a viable strategy, and it was really hurting from that hit. By having a choice restriction instead, you get to hit the Alphamon respectively, but you also get to keep decks that would have been hurt by that hit alive. I really like the choice restriction idea, and I don't know, maybe Bandai hears it, maybe they'll incorporate it in future ban lists, so be sure to give this a like and a thumbs up, so that way they might actually pass it around. All in all, how I feel about the Digimon TCG is, oddly enough, I actually think it's in a pretty good spot. You have really easy access to some cards, and despite a lot of people's complaints about some specific decks, I think there's actually a lot more viable decks in this meta. But when all is said and done, I think we can actually talk about the real problem with the Digimon TCG. Make a fucking sim, Bandai!